Howard was one of the most enthusiastic people I've ever known. And to talk about enthusiasm, he had it for this agency, he had it for the mission, he had it for kids. And when I joined the board, 04, 05, something like that, Howard immediately became interested in the mission and wanted to know more and wanted to know how he could be more active in the mission. A couple years later, he joined the board and became a very active participant on the board. We went to the Teen Institute one time together. We drove down for that. We went to another event at a downtown hotel that we went to, and it was just, he would light up when he'd see the kids enjoying themselves in a sober environment. It was just so much fun. And not only his presence, but his financial commitments and his ability to bring others into the agency and to bring others into meeting the needs of the mission, particularly TCP. He was a big supporter of TCP and frankly saved it last year, for which we'll always be grateful. But he was as passionate a giver to this agency of anybody that I know.
Well, and Howard and I have a long history, as you do, Jim, with Howard, covering many topics in many areas of life. And he was, as you say, really passionate, enthusiastic about a lot of areas. But when it came to NCADA, he made sure that when I was introduced to the organization, he knows I like history, he made sure that I knew the full history of the organization, what NCADA does, how the organization works, and he was not bashful about asking for funds, which is a really, really important characteristic when you're involved with a nonprofit. And because of that, I have a very special place in my heart for NCADA because of my knowledge of the organization, and also hearing you at my kids' schools. I was aware of the services provided, and I have two sons who came to the offices here, who were beneficiaries of specific counseling. And when they went away to college, my oldest son specifically said, "I am so glad that you did that," because teenagers always aren't interested in that type of education. And he specifically said, "I see a lot of my fraternity brothers and friends who are, very deep into drinking and drug use, and I'm not, and I got it, and I really appreciate that." So I have a very special place in my heart for Howard's making sure that I knew about NCADA. Well, what's interesting is when I was first introduced to Howard, I had no idea what he did or anything about him, really. It was in the context of recovery, and I had known him for some period of time before I knew about his business background, and he had been a great help to me along spiritual lines and areas completely unrelated to business. Well, the more I got to know Howard, the more was revealed about his business background, and of course he got his MBA at Wharton and had a number of illustrious executive C-suite positions. And then I asked him at one point, because I was getting free advice from him for years, he's a management consultant, I said, "Well, maybe I should pay you." And he resisted initially, but then finally he worked with my company and me, and his business acumen and wisdom and his ability to succinctly drive a point home were just tremendous. And the combination of his spirituality, his generosity, and that business acumen is not something you see all in one person. And it was a tremendous benefit to me and my company, and I know NCADA and any other organization where you have a combination of business and mission.
Yeah, Howard was, I loved what you said about when he had a point. When he had a point, he was going to drive it home, and it was going to be clear, and you were going to understand it. Howard had a way of, I would love to take business issues to Howard, and I'd come up with 3 or 4 solutions that I saw as possibilities, and he'd come up with 3 or 4 others that were just out someplace that would come in that, oh yeah, that could make sense and that could make sense. And he did it in the NCADA scope when he was here on the board. But I know that he also did it. I shared some time with him on the Lindell Club board. He was president of the Lindell Club. He was president of the Alano Society here in St. Louis. And just a contribution to the recovery community in St. Louis like few people have been. He's come up with different, it's always been around marketing. It's always been about how do you promote the name, how do you get people out, how do you get more people involved in the mission. And they've generally been ideas that if we implemented them, and when we did, they succeeded. It was great. As a person in long-term recovery, I'm very aware of Sober Vacation. Sober Vacation is a group out of Los Angeles with whom Howard became very friendly and did a lot of, as Nick had said, in-kind contributions, if you will, to help them get their business going. And Howard went, I don't know, 20 some odd years in a row to these Sober Vacations, which are held typically at Club Meds throughout the world, where they close down the club and they bring in people that are in typically 12-step recovery programs. And the business itself was in trouble, and Howard's business acumen, plus, as Nick said, his link to spirituality and recovery, helped it become a very thriving business. And what's fun now is I travel quite a bit, and if I identify to somebody that I'm from St. Louis, oftentimes there's somebody out of the blue, hey, do you know Happy Howard? A lot of people in a lot of different places know Happy Howard for who he has been when they get to know him. So it's really been a wonderful thing to know him that way.
Has Howard always worn Hawaiian shirts?
About as long as I've known him.
The same one. Howard was never known as a thread god. Nick's probably can expound on this, but he followed the Steve Jobs idea of I've got so many decisions to make in a day that one of them shouldn't be what I put on in the morning. So he was typically in a Hawaiian shirt, or more often than not, a black turtleneck. He loved orange as well from his school in Iowa.
Yeah, and I think the lesson there for me was, which is one of the most important lessons that he taught me, was being comfortable in your own skin. And if there's anybody who is a champion for loving himself and learning to take care of himself and teaching others how to take care of themselves and to feel comfortable with who they are exactly as they were made, I mean, it was Howard. And I think that extended into a lot of, eccentricities that he was completely comfortable with because he was comfortable with himself. Well, and this one came from Howard and Jim, I think. I don't always start from the healthiest place, and I remember calling him to complain one day about how I had been solicited by a couple of different organizations for donations. And he said, well, Murphy and I think about that a little bit differently. When we get calls to contribute charitably, we think of that as an opportunity to be of service and as an honor. And I thought, wow, okay, I feel really stupid now. He didn't intend to make me feel stupid, but from that point on, instead of feeling irritated, I would feel grateful. So, in so many ways, he would completely, shift the story and change, a really important behavior in me and others.
You mentioned Sober Vacation, and Sober Vacation has attendees pick a sponsor. And while humble and while a very gracious human, he's also a little grandiose. And so who do you pick as your sponsor? A guy whose story's in the big book. And Howard developed a very long-term relationship with Dr. Paul, who wrote the Dr. Alcoholic Addict, and it's a different story now. But one of the things Dr. Paul taught Howard that he taught me was that a sponsor's job is to shift the perspective of the sponsee just a little bit. And he was so good at that. Because like in the example Nick just cited, he just had to throw out one little thought. It wasn't shaming, it wasn't condemning, but it caused you to look at things from a different perspective. And consistent with all that's going on in the world right now, if we could all just take that one little shift a little bit and start to see things from a different perspective, I think we'd all be a little better off. Couple of things that Howard not only, and it wasn't just what he shared with you, it was who you saw him being. Howard taught me to show up. I'm not from St. Louis, and I'm certainly not from Iowa, which is the center of the universe for Howard. But when my mom died in 2001, and when my father died in 2009, he showed up at both of the funerals and both of the memorial services. And what a gift that was. I remember being in my hometown in upstate New York and coming out of my mom's memorial service just distraught and seeing him standing there, and I just fell into his arms, and it was just such a gift. It was such a gift. And so he taught me to show up. He also taught me that if you look at somebody's checkbook and their day timer, you can see what they're committed to. Because the two most valuable things to most human beings are their time and their money. So where you're spending your time and where you're spending your money really demonstrates real clearly what you're committed to. And it gave me a new perspective on seeing where my time, because we've all only got 168 hours a week, he'd stress that, and how well we'd spend our time and where we'd spend our money, and it was such a gift.
Well, I know that Jim Goodman was somebody who he had tremendous respect for and looked up to, and as I got to know Jim, I completely understood that. I think I'm going to flip that upside down and say that Howard sponsored a lot of people in the program, and the sort of the maxim is when you sponsor somebody, a lot of times you get more back from them than you even give. And so when I look at all the people he helped, I mean, the truth of the matter is they helped him a lot too. And I would say a lot of times his sponsees could be some of his heroes as he watched them walk through very difficult circumstances. So,
yeah, I couldn't agree more. Howard was open to everyone. Howard was available to everyone. For a guy that traveled like he did and was as busy and involved as he was, he always had time for a newcomer. And there was just something magic about him. With Randy, for instance, he held Randy in such esteem, and Randy just couldn't stay sober and died of this disease. So he never lost sight of the fact that we were dealing with a fatal disease. And Yeah, I like that. It was the people of Alcoholics Anonymous, particularly the new people, that he adored and lit him up.
I remember when I was at that meeting, he was having a big milestone, and he kept saying that it's not about me, it's about your 6 days or 6 months. That's a bigger milestone than me for however many years. You know, it was really poignant. So, what else am I not asking? What else do you want to say about Howard, about Howard's imprint to NCADA, his imprint to the recovery community here? Was he involved with Harris House? Did you want to?
Yeah, he was on Harris House's
Okay,
board.
that was the one
Mhm.
thing that I didn't hear mentioned, but I didn't know if we wanted to give them a shout out at all. It's up to you. Anything else I'm not asking?
He saved my life. You know, I had been in recovery a couple of years when Howard, I mean, we knew each other right from the beginning. But when I asked him to be my sponsor, he had just had a sponsee walk away from him, and he had said, I don't need a new best friend. And I said, okay, I can live with that. And, 25, 28 years later, when we had talked almost every day, Howard was my best friend and continues to be my best friend. It's tougher now because he's facing health challenges, but I get to talk to him a couple times a week, and I'm grateful for who he's been for me. And one of the things that's really fun is to go to a meeting where his sponsees go and see how it cascades down. It's not unusual to be at a meeting where there are 20 people whose lives are better because Howard imprinted himself on somebody who passed it on and passed it on, which is how it works.
Yeah, I agree completely. I was thinking impact, and then also the way that somebody makes you feel. And, I can speak personally that, Howard impacted the most important areas of my life. Who I am as a parent, who I am as a husband, and could very well have, saved the most important relationships in my life through his counsel and his knowledge. And when you think about, again, the ripple effects and the impact he had on so many other people like that. But, when I stop to think of Howard now, it's just a warm feeling. And, if that's how somebody is remembered, which they say that's the way that they're remembered, is how they make you feel, I think, that says it all. He makes a lot of people feel really good because of the love he gives.